My name is Harry Simon, and my presentation this afternoon is based on my thesis, which is entitled Intersections Between Contemporary Nivanuatu Anglophone and Francophone Literature. It is a thesis taken under the supervision of Dr. Sylvie Ortega and part of the East Core Research Laboratory. My presentation is divided into five different parts. I will commence with an introduction that will identify my research topic and the geographic area of study, followed by the second part of my presentation on the problematic, and the third part on the hypothesis, which my research will aim to delve into, and the fourth part, which is my methodology, outlining the methods I will be using to obtain an in-depth analysis from my corpus, before finishing off with the conclusion, highlighting some of the preliminary results that I have made from my second and third year analysis and findings. So Nivanuatu literature mainly encompasses two distinct groups of writers, Anglophone and Francophone. Both categories are an imprint of, I would say, today's colonial history and a consequence of the running of separate administrations by France and Britain under the condominium government from 1906 to 1980. So French and English are mostly considered as the principal languages of education, yet I would say only a few native Nivanuatu use either language as their everyday language of communication at home or within their extended family and social sphere. Nivanuatu people who consider themselves as Francophones are mainly those who have attended a Francophone school run by the Catholic Education Services, LADEC, whose role was very crucial in maintaining the French language and culture prior and after independence. On the whole, this thesis will thereby focus on post-colonial literature, that is to say, the effects of colonization on cultures after the end of colonial rule, and more specifically, literature produced by contemporary native writers and the way they put into play language, gender, and race. The three major themes which this dissertation will focus on and how they intersect through both linguistic poles. So in trying to demonstrate the relationship between language, gender, and race, it was important that a well-orientated problematic was constructed, and especially one that would also enable me to carry out my research thoroughly with an in-depth analysis. So it was through this particular aim that my problematic understanding how contemporary Nivanuatu Anglophone and Francophone literature intersect through gender and race came to light. As a transitive verb and diminutive, the term intersects here refers to the concept of intersectionality as highlighted in the title of my thesis. It is a concept which my analysis will exploit through an analytical framework, which will also enable me to understand how aspects of a person or people's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Also, this approach will help me to demonstrate the interconnected nature of social and political categories such as race and class and gender in creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage, as I will try to demonstrate throughout my analysis. The above stated problematic to be answered, however, calls upon other channels of research and hypothesis that will also need careful attention and analyzing in order to answer the above problematic, such as in terms of the choice of language by the authors, for instance. In the case of Vanuatu, some of my researchers and interviewed conducted so far seem to already validate this hypothesis and reiterate the writer's preference to produce their work in their language of educational background and only use Bishlama when they're code switching from either English or French to Bishlama, or probably using some other commonly indigenized words. This is a very common trait as exemplified here in Akaimas, which is a French novel written by one of the Francophone writers, Marcel Letteron, and how he uses the words Namandi and Nasara, which means simply means a right to passage and a meeting place in his passages. Secondly, how does a literary process enable us to understand gender in a male-dominated and patriarchal society like Vanuatu? More specifically through literature, and how women have been presented throughout the narrative, whether as a woman in a literary patriarchal discourse, or a woman in a colonized setting, or as an independent woman, a writer. Furthermore, how does contemporary literature create new space for these oppressive, challenging, and disruptive voices? An important point I would like to note here is the dominance of women in contemporary literary landscape that has made both the Anglophone and Francophone literature equally unique and interesting. This is clearly the case for the Anglophone writers such as Yasmin Jordan and her poem Praise Water, Praise Women, in a book of poetry that was published in 2020 titled Voice. Praises and highlights the place of women in society, like the importance of water as an essential element in the survival of men, and likewise for women in her role to create and nourish life for a better living and growth. This point intersects on several occasions with what the Francophone writers as well, such as Marcel Mittel, highlights through the character of Nathalie in his book Tosan, as a woman of courage that regardless of the hardship she endures from her husband, she continues to fight for the well-being of her children. Thirdly, is as one of the main themes of under study and this thesis is race. The importance of race, I mean, as Vanuatu people who come from a common ethnic background with different subracial groups, however, yet remain unified with a common and national interests, which are heavily orientated around cultural identity, land tenure, and the custom of the place. This is interesting in the sense where it has already been an existing trend since the 1960s. Literary texts by indigenous writers, such as those of the first wave of writers, such as Grace Molisa and Mildred Sope, still transpires through today's contemporary writers, whom continue to make an important intervention in by the way they break the structures of the narrative and classify race on linguistic grounds, such as the Anglophone or Francophone, as a result of the colonial policies of assimilation, which were implemented through religion and education by France and Britain in the New Hebrides. One of the other hypotheses of interest was also to focus on the rise of contemporary writers after the absence of writers and publication between the first wave of writers, particularly between Grace Mollis's last book of poetry, which was published in the 1990s. Unlike Vanuatu Anglophone literature, Francophone contemporary literature was slowly taking shape and is slowly taking shape and continues to develop progressively over the years, mainly due to financial assistance from the Alliance Française. It is also a way for writers like Paul and Marcel to preserve and valorize the place of the French language and culture in Vanuatu vis-a-vis the English language, which has more speakers and make up about 65% of the population today. On the Anglophone side, the sudden rise of writers, particularly women, was mainly to gain a voice. This is already the case with Sister Stanhope Strong, a Vanuatu women's anthology, which was published in 2021. Is another piece of written literature carrying the voices of Anglophone women in contemporary Vanuatu today, which has sought to try and deconstruct the gender roles and ensure equal rights between men and women. In terms of methodology, this thesis will use data collected and literary works mainly from a group of primary sources that are made up of Ni Vanuatu novelists and poets from both the Anglophone and Francophone linguistic poles. Most of the publications that I will be using will range from 2009 until present. Other literary works from the Pacific Island writers, Anglophone and Francophone, may also be used to conduct an intertextual and qualitative analysis. This will allow a comparison of analysis from other literary spheres in the Pacific region, and also, more interestingly, enable a close analysis of the differences and similarities in the experience and impacts of colonization on the indigenous people. For the time being, field work is not currently planned as part of this research, although qualitative field work may be added to the project if variables need to be contextualized. Other interviews may be carried out if necessary, ranging from structural to non-structural interviews, mainly in order to allow for flexibility and also allow the interviewees to express their ideas and thoughts in their own words. A few conclusions that I have drawn so far from my analysis, especially in terms of language, is how the imposition of French and English language prior to independence has had a tremendous impact on the Ni Vanuatu people, particularly through the educational policies implemented over time and separating Ni Vanuatu people on linguistic grounds. However, the rhythm and grammatical structures of Bislama, the insertion of Bislama in written literature clearly illustrates a strong sense of Ni Vanuatu identity, which is seeping into the Anglophone and Francophone literary poles, giving both authenticity and originality to Ni Vanuatu voices, as their voice animates the narration and amplifies beyond the textual level of each particular story. Concerning gender, it is clear that one cannot overcome the way women are portrayed throughout the novels and poems. All writers and poets tackle issues affecting women openly. Paul Tavo, for instance, focuses on the current image of women in Ni Vanuatu woman, but more specifically from a negative perspective, as he looks beyond into the way women have crossed cultural and social borders in a contemporary society that has consequently given them a very negative picture of women today. On the whole, Metilong and Tavo actually use female characters to address common problems that are continuously devaluing the image of women and tearing families apart in Vanuatu. This is an intersecting theme that is also recurrent among upcoming Anglophone writers like Rebecca Olo and her poem Sister, You Must Stand Up Strong, meaning sister, we both have to stand firmly, and Telstra Newman's poem Their Lives Matter, no matter what. So on the whole, we can say that it is more than evident that Vanuatu's contemporary literature, predominantly Francophone, and the few minor and upcoming Anglophone writers will continue to recount their stories, and especially how they intersect on different levels, socially, culturally, and racially, which are main areas that until today define the basis of a Ni Vanuatu society. So with all that being said, I would like to thank you very much for your time and positive listening. Thank you.